Welcome to Sound Off Extra here on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off Wrestling podcast, which drops each and every Sunday on the Solomonster.com, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, and iTunes. I am the Solomonster. It is the first extra here on YouTube of the new year. It is Sunday, January 4th, 2015. This is, I believe, the third edition of Sound Off Inbox. First one since October, where we basically answer your questions. You guys email me, thesolomonster@gmail.com. Whatever I'm not able to get to on the actual podcast or answer directly, I put them in a list, some of the best questions, some of the ones that I find interesting. And we do a bonus inbox here exclusively for you guys on YouTube. Now, if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. You'll see a link in the video. You'll see a button below the video. Hit that button. That way, whenever a bonus extra goes up here on YouTube, you will be among the first to be notified of that. And I think with that, we may as well just get into it here. We have about 17 different questions that I have collected from you guys, so we'll just run through them in no particular order. We'll start with John, who sent this one in. He says, I was just thinking about what you said on your recent podcast about Roman Reigns just needing to do what he does best, kick ass and leave. If Brock Lesnar leaves after WrestleMania, do you think pairing Roman Reigns up with Paul Heyman would be a good idea? It would, of course, mean turning Heyman babyface, but that should not be a problem if he is not affiliated with Brock anymore. If you think about it, Roman Reigns is a lot like Brock in the early days in terms of his size, promo ability, and future top guy potential. I don't see why Heyman has to turn face in that scenario. I think Paul Heyman as a babyface would be a bad idea. And, you know, he's just much better off as a heel. If anything, I would think it would be Heyman turning on Lesnar, which would turn Brock babyface, even if he does end up leaving right after. And then Roman Reigns would go heel, win the championship, and become a Heyman guy. And then you could have Seth Rollins back as a babyface, because at some point, everybody turns. At some point, he'll be back as a babyface. It's just a matter of when. You could turn him. You could have, of course, Dean Ambrose is a babyface, plus John Cena. Daniel Bryan now is back. All those guys would be on the babyface side to chase Reigns throughout the year, throughout 2015. Eventually, the guy's going to be a monster babyface anyway, so the idea of turning Roman Reigns heel, I'm not saying I would do that. I'm just saying under this scenario, wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. I see a lot of Roman Reigns hate. I talk about this on my podcast a lot. I am not one of the haters. I like Roman Reigns. Even though I don't know that he's necessarily ready to be the top guy, I don't know that I would put the championship on him right now. I think he could probably benefit from waiting a little while, maybe another year. But in a lot of ways, I kind of compare where Reigns is now. It's not the exact same thing, but I look at The Rock, and when The Rock first came up, he was the smiling babyface, and everybody resented him for it, and they said, die, Rocky, die. He got hurt, came back, and he was a heel. I'm not referring to that. What I'm referring to when I talk about The Rock is he came back as a heel in 97. He flourished as he became the leader of the nation, and they kind of booted Farouk out of there, and The Rock was the IC champion. He was feuding with Ken Shamrock and some other people. But what happened in 98 is that the fans all of a sudden organically started to turn in favor of The Rock. They love the guy. And they turned him babyface. Now, what WWE did, because they had the hottest babyface ever on top at that time, Steve Austin, they didn't really need two guys in that same spot. The Rock went babyface after SummerSlam in 98 for like 2 months. And then they did the swerve at Survivor Series where he went back to being a heel. He was the corporate champion, and then he had the feud with Austin going into 99. By the time WrestleMania was over, they had one more match, he and Austin, at Backlash. At that point, they booted The Rock out of the corporation, and he turned babyface because the fans demanded it. They were ready for it. So I kind of look at that part of The Rock's career, and it reminds me a little bit of what we're seeing now with Roman Reigns, and that I think if you were to turn the guy heel, it wouldn't be the end of him. And if anything, it might actually do him some good. And then over the course of the year, as the fans demand it, if the fans are pushing for it, if it organically happens, they'll want to see him as a babyface, and they won't have that feeling like, oh, they're shoving this guy down my throat. So that would not be a terrible idea, but there's this notion that Paul Heyman would have to turn babyface in this scenario because Roman Reigns is a babyface. No, I would much rather keep Heyman as a heel, turn Roman. They've got a number of babyfaces now that are on that roster. Bryan is back. and with Heyman there to do the talking for him, because promos are not Roman Reigns' strong point. That's what people are really knocking him for. I like Roman, but I will admit he's not a great promo. So if you got somebody who is a great promo to do the talking for him, just let him be the enforcer who goes out there and just kicks ass and spears people and beats the crap out of people, for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months as a heel, whatever. I think that might do him some good. Or, here's another idea. The Paul Heyman, Brock Lesnar, Seth Rollins alliance that we see right now, maybe that lasts through WrestleMania with Brock getting a win over Roman Reigns. Since everybody thinks they know the WrestleMania main event's going to be Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, and I'm not so sure of that now with Bryan being back, but everybody knows it's going to be Reigns and Lesnar, and that, of course, Roman Reigns is the chosen one. They're going to put him over. What if they did a little bit of a swerve and they shocked everybody, had the match, but Brock won, right? Nice little swerve there. Only for Paul Heyman then to turn on Brock Lesnar and allow Seth Rollins to come on down, cash in, curb stomp, and win the WWE Championship. Then you have Rollins and Heyman together, and Brock probably goes off to the UFC or does whatever he's going to do. I think either one of those scenarios are intriguing. I would be okay with either of those ideas. I think either one works. James from Cambridge, England. What do you think of the rumor circulating that the main event of WrestleMania 31 could be Roman Reigns against Dean Ambrose against Seth Rollins for the championship, with Rollins entering as the champion and Reigns going over? I think it could be a great match. I think Roman Reigns, Dean Ambrose, and Seth Rollins can have a great match. As an idea, I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible if the goal is to build Roman Reigns as the next big hero. And here's why, okay? It's very simple. 2 words. Dean Ambrose. I already think Roman Reigns is probably in for a long night at the Royal Rumble. The Rumble's in Philadelphia that night. Now you got Daniel Bryan back, which throws things into a bit of disarray. And you've got at least 2 real potential candidates, I think, to win that match at the Rumble. But Dean Ambrose is the most over guy of all 3 members of the Shield. Seth Rollins is a heel, of course, so people don't like him. Other people think he's fucking boring. He's a terrible promo. I disagree with that. I think when he's out there cutting a promo, as long as they put him out there for, and some of the shit they have him say, and he repeats himself over and over again, yeah, fine, that makes for a bad promo, but I think people are mistaking that for Seth Rollins himself not being able to cut a promo. Seth Rollins is far better than a lot of other guys I've seen, a lot of guys out of NXT that I've seen cutting promos, so let's cut him some slack. But yeah, okay, people don't like Rollins. Not everybody has warmed up to Roman Reigns. Most people, though, love Dean Ambrose. He goes out there, he gets a great response, people are into him. He's over. He's the most over of the 3, I think, right now. And so if you do that, and I don't think they are, and I think it would be a mistake if you do that, you put all 3 guys in the ring together with the title on the line. I think because Dean Ambrose is just generally more well-liked, and the fact that there was never any resolution between Rollins and Ambrose when that feud was over. They had the 2 big pay-per-view matches. They had the Lumberjack match at SummerSlam, which was a shit ton better than it had any right to be. The best fucking Lumberjack match I've ever seen. Somehow they made that stupid stipulation work. They had the match at Hell in a Cell, which was a little disappointing, and I was not a fan of the hologram finish. That was just fucking stupid. Both times, Seth Rollins beat Dean Ambrose. There was a screwjob finish, and one he hit him with the briefcase, and the other, Bray Wyatt interfered. Dean Ambrose looked like an idiot. He never got that big win over Seth Rollins. So unless the idea is that they're saving it to give him the big win, maybe for the championship at WrestleMania, I think that would make a lot of people very happy. And I think that for those reasons combined, if you put those 3 guys in the ring, and in your mind, your goal is not so much to get over Dean Ambrose. Your goal is to get over Roman Reigns as maybe the heir apparent to John Cena. I can't think of a worse idea. I cannot think of a worse idea than to put all 3 of those guys in the ring together, because you're handicapping Reigns. That's what you're doing by doing that. You're splitting the crowd. You're risking that they're going to, boo Roman Reigns. They're all going to want Dean Ambrose to win. And if Roman Reigns does get the win, it's going to be somewhat anticlimactic, I think, because Ambrose has a lot of fans. So why would you do that? Why would you put him in there, I think, if that's the goal? I just think the match itself, I'm sure, would be very good, but I just think that's a really stupid, dumb idea. If Roman Reigns is your guy, and if Roman Reigns is not your guy, and if Ambrose is, great. Go for it. But if not, I just think that's a terrible idea. Justin from Abbotsford, Canada. What's the funniest moment in pro wrestling history? Mine has to be when DX did a parody of the Nation with Triple H as The Croc. What is yours? Mine would have to be Stephanie McMahon with Rusev and Lana a few months ago, telling them that there are no politics in WWE. One of the funniest fucking things I've ever heard. Marco from New Jersey. I've heard many stories from wrestlers saying Haku was a legit tough guy who you absolutely did not want any problems with. I've also heard Scott Steiner is a roided up borderline psychopath who's a legit amateur wrestler from Michigan. My question is, in their prime and in a shoot fight, who do you have your money on, Haku or Scott Steiner? Haku. All day, all night. Haku. He's maybe the one guy, Haku is, that you hear stories about, and there's no one around to deny any of it. There's no one around to say, it's all bullshit, that's all legend. Nope. Every single shoot interview that I've seen where Haku, Meng, whatever, when his name gets brought up, it's all the same. Everybody is either afraid of him, they respect him, he's the toughest guy they've ever met. It's always the same. Universally, everybody agrees. The toughest guy they've ever known. You'd only fuck with him if you had a death wish. I think it was Perry Saturn, once said that in a bar fight, he would kill everybody without even blinking. Which sounds like a great gimmick. I mean, it's kind of a shame. This guy was around it for years in WWE. He went to WCW. He was Meng. He was one of the faces of Fear. I don't want to say he was a job guy because that's not really true, but he was never really anybody special. I think if they played up that aspect of him, I don't think he would have necessarily been a main eventer, but I think people would have had a lot more respect for him, like just the everyday fans. When you say Haku, they were like, oh, okay, Haku, he's just another guy. They never really played up that part of him on television. I think maybe they should have. I mean, this is a guy, you could look up the stories online. This is a guy who almost gouged another wrestler's eyeball out of his skull in a backstage fight. I don't think it actually happened. I think he came very close, but I don't think he actually did gouge it out. He bit off another guy's nose. That he did do. Bit off the guy's nose because he made the mistake of calling wrestling fake. You won't find many legit tough guys in wrestling anymore like Haku. Dan in Hull, England. Supposing John Cena wins the WWE World Heavyweight Championship at the Royal Rumble, then drops it to Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 31, that would make John Cena a 16-time world champion. If Reigns becomes the number one babyface as a result of the win, do you think that if John Cena were to turn heel, he could use beating Ric Flair's record to get heat? If so, I'd also like to see him wearing a Flair-esque robe and possibly wooing. I think that the heat he would get would be off the charts. I cannot see the robe and the woos unless it was done maybe one time to get heat. But yeah, okay, if they were to do a John Cena turn, which they're not, okay, I don't know how many times I could say this. It's not going to happen. But if they were to do one, it would be a great way to get heat. Absolutely. Every near fall, are you kidding me? Every near fall and every John Cena Roman Reigns match after that would be, it would have people on the edge of their seat. Similar to what I would have expected if they had ever done that John Cena vs. Undertaker match at WrestleMania before the streak was broken, because for years on my podcast, I kept saying the one opponent for The Undertaker that they haven't done, that they need to do, it would be a huge match at WrestleMania, was Undertaker and Cena. It's a fresh match that a lot of people have never seen. I mean, you and I, the people listening to this right now, probably saw Cena and The Undertaker in 2003 when Cena was first starting out, 2002, whatever it was. A lot of people have never seen that match before. Cena, of course, is in a different stratosphere now compared to where he was 12 years ago. And with the streak still intact, can you imagine? Because, there's a lot of John Cena haters out there. They want to see him lose. They want to see him die. They want all these horrible things. And the idea that John Cena would be the one to break the streak, it's like, sacrilege to these people. Can you imagine the near falls in an Undertaker-Cena match at WrestleMania had the streak not been broken? They can't do it now. I mean, if they wanted to, I guess they could do Cena-Undertaker, but the match, all the juice that match would have had is completely out the window. I mean, there are certain matches that you can still do with Taker. If he were to come back, that would be okay, even though he's not unbeaten anymore. I still think, for example, even though the match might suck, you could get away with doing an Undertaker-Sting match even though he's not undefeated anymore, because you just make it a retirement match. You make it very clear going in that no matter what, this is it. Both guys, this is their final match. One guy's going to win, one guy's going to go out a loser. That works. That will sell, pay-per-view buys or network subscriptions or however they want to judge it these days. Cena Undertaker, though, that ship has sailed. So I think it's kind of comparable in that if you were to do this and Cena went heel and this notion that, oh my God, he's going to break the record of Ric Flair and the number of world titles, I think every match that he and Reigns go in there and have every near fall, I'm telling you, it would have people on the edge of their seats. So yeah, I think it would get a lot of heat. It could probably work. Ricardo from Orlando, Florida. I read online that Randy Savage was going to have a retirement feud with Shawn Michaels. I read that Savage had pitched the idea in 1994, the same time he is accused of having a relationship with Stephanie McMahon. Just wondering, what is your take on that and how good of a feud this would have been? I don't see what the Stephanie McMahon thing has to do with anything, and it's still unproven, so who the hell knows? I think it actually goes back to 92. It might go back a little bit earlier than 94. Now, this is according to Lanny Poffo, okay, Savage's brother. They did have a match on a European tour in 1992. It may have been the only match that Michaels and Savage ever had. And it's on one of the Coliseum videos. I've seen it before. It might even be up on YouTube somewhere. Of course, it's not on the network, God forbid. I don't think, but it's out there if you want to find it. It's a fun thing to think about. When Poffo explained what Savage had planned, he made the pitch because he felt he had a lot left in the tank to offer, but he looked at a guy like Shawn Michaels and said, this guy's the future. I want to have a program, and I want this to be a 2-year-long program that culminates in a match at WrestleMania. I guess that might have been WrestleMania 10 if the idea had been pitched 2 years before that. And Savage would lose, he would pass the torch, he would put over Shawn Michaels, and he would retire. This is according to Lanny Poffo. I don't think Randy Savage ever publicly talked about this. But if it's true, it's a hell of an idea. It's a hell of an idea. I would have loved to have seen it. Of course, had that happened, we probably never would have gotten the ladder match in 94 with Shawn and Razor. That was so influential on so many wrestlers since. But I think that, you look at Randy Savage as like the consummate pro wrestler. There is nobody like Randy Savage. There never has been. There never will be. The guy was fucking awesome. He was everything that a pro wrestler should be. He could go, especially in the earlier years. Nobody could touch this guy in the ring. His quickness, he was a great heel. He was a great babyface. But he also had all the flashy stuff that you would look for in pro wrestling. It wasn't like he was like an amateur wrestler or anything like that. He had the flashy robes. He had the wacky promo style. He would wag his finger all the time. Everything was just awesome about the guy. And the intensity that he had in that feud in 91 into 92 with Jake Roberts, I would have, and that's one of my all-time favorite feuds. I think it's underrated. I think it's a crime that it didn't, get the conclusion that it deserved at a WrestleMania on the big stage. But just for the few months that those guys feuded in the fall and the winter of 91, it was unbelievable. It was real, I think. It felt real at a time when you didn't really find too many serious, real angles like that in WWE. It was still a very cartoony world and all the stuff with Hogan and that sort of thing. It was ahead of its time, I think, in a lot of ways. And I look at the intensity that Savage had in that feud. I would have loved to have seen what he had planned to keep that thing going for 2 years with Shawn Michaels, if that was the idea, a 2-year program. And possibly 2 straight WrestleMania matches. I would assume that if that had been the plan, it probably would have been WrestleMania 9 and 10 that he and Michaels would have had matches. Maybe Savage would have won the first one, Michaels wins the second one and gets put over, and then Savage kind of rides off into the sunset. That would have been awesome. And in the end, Shawn Michaels would get to retire Randy Savage, and get put over as the next big thing. I think things worked out okay for Shawn Michaels. And I have my doubts about whether or not Savage would have been happy retiring. The whole reason he left in 94 was, he saw Hogan go to WCW. Hogan got a second life there. And Hogan's another guy who had kind of been cast aside. All right, Vince McMahon, we're going for youth. It's the new generation. And I think he was right, but he still could have gotten a lot of mileage out of those guys had he kept them around. I think Savage would have ended up in WCW anyway. I think even if Savage had been retired by Shawn Michaels, he would have been back wrestling in WCW within a couple of years, because he would not have been able to sit on the sidelines and watch all these other older guys go and make a ton of money and be big stars and all the NWO stuff and everything, and not want to be a part of that. So I think in the end, things worked out just well, as they did, but I doubt very seriously that Savage would have been able to stay retired. Merv in Lincoln, UK. A lot of UK questions. I was thinking about all these pay-per-views we have today and wondered how things would have been if there were as many in the Hogan Warrior Macho Man era. Do you think, for instance, that Hulk Hogan's championship reign would have lasted so long? Or do you think overexposure would have killed some of his appeal, cutting his run as champion short? Even though I think we have too many shows today, I wish there had been a few more back then, as I feel we lost out on seeing so many great pay-per-view matches that were either just house show matches or never happened at all. Do you think this also might have led to some other great title runs for wrestlers who never got a chance? That is a great question. Think of all the house show programs that never made it to television, and there were a lot of them. I even think of stuff like Ultimate Warrior and Undertaker. Not that their matches, I'm sure, were great. They never had a big pay-per-view match. I don't even think they ever had a match on television. But, it was a house show program. They actually did angles on television that set up for matches that I don't think ever aired on television. They did that one funeral parlor segment where they locked Ultimate Warrior in the casket. You look at Warrior and Jake Roberts in the summer of '91 when Jake turned heel. Right? He turned on the Ultimate Warrior. And Warrior got fired at SummerSlam, so that's kind of why that never happened. But that's another feud. We never got to see that play out. There was never any sort of big pay-per-view match or program with Jake and the Warrior. There are other... I can probably go back and think of other examples of matches that did happen, just not on television. And it's kind of crazy to think. And yeah, there were guys like Ted DiBiase, and I think Curt Hennig would have had a shot. Back then it was still the big man era. I don't know that Mr. Perfect would have been WWF champion. He had a shot. He certainly could have done well with it, I think, for a while. And guys like DiBiase and even Jake. Jake never held a title in WWE. And I think heel Jake Roberts in the early 90s, nobody could touch him. In the ring, he wasn't the worker that he used to be because he had some really bad neck issues. But even so, just his presence, his character, his promos, his psychology, the guy was fucking great. I think back again to that Randy Savage feud. Think about this. They had two matches that did air on TV. Okay, they had a match at that Tuesday in Texas pay-per-view, and then they blew the whole thing off before WrestleMania 8. They blew it off on an episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. The first match they had, I don't even know if it went a full 5 minutes. It was all action, and Savage was just a madman, and he dropped the elbow and he beat him. Just like that. And then afterwards they did the angle where he laid out Savage and he smacked Elizabeth in the face. Again, all of this was just ahead of its time back then in WWE. Maybe they did similar stuff in the NWA with, what's her name, Baby Doll and all that. But in WWF, you didn't see stuff like that back then. When they did the second match with Savage and Roberts on that Saturday Night's Main Event in '92, it went a little longer than 5 minutes. I don't remember it being a great match. It was a pretty basic match. But the feud, the story, the intensity of both guys is what carried it. So a guy like Jake Roberts, I think, could have easily been a world champion in WWE. Hell, there's the story of when he was a babyface. Actually, maybe he wasn't a babyface. I take that back. He was still a heel. This was before he became a babyface. And actually, this may have been exactly what led to him becoming a babyface in 1986-87. When Roberts first came in, he was a heel. And there's the famous story, and I know I've told this before on the Sound Off podcast, where they had taped... they would tape hours of television at these tapings back then. And they did a test run. They did an episode of The Snake Pit, which was Jake's old talk show. And he had Hulk Hogan on as his guest. Hogan was the champion. This was back in '86. Hogan was at his peak. Okay, keep that in mind. Hogan was at his peak. And Jake was the heel. At the end of the segment, Jake laid out Hogan with a DDT. And the live crowd, this may have been in Pennsylvania or Rhode Island somewhere, popped. They cheered. Hogan got laid out with a DDT, which was very over as a finish. And the people cheered Jake Roberts laying out Hulk Hogan. It's the sort of thing you would almost expect to see now in wrestling, where the heels get cheered. You know, you have a babyface who's getting his ass, he's getting murdered on television, and you have fans in the first 5 rows going, one more time, one more time. You never really had that back then as much as you do now, but you did there. And I think what happened is they panicked. Hogan, I'm sure, panicked. I don't think that ever aired except whatever local market it was for. It did air on television. I want to say it was in Rhode Island. I have to go back and check. But it never aired nationally on Superstars or Wrestling Challenge, which it was supposed to. So that's a rare piece of footage if anybody out there knows where you can find it. You know, Jake laying out Hogan with the DDT. But I think it was very shortly after that all of a sudden Jake Roberts became a babyface. Gee, I wonder why. You know, I'm sure Hogan was very intimidated by that. But imagine a Jake Roberts, Hulk Hogan feud for the World Championship back in 86, 87 with Hogan as the babyface and Roberts as the heel. I mean, it would have been huge. But back then, things were different. And yeah, there were a lot of guys who probably could have gotten a run, who could have at least competed for the championship, even if they didn't win it. And they never really got that shot, and that's a shame. I think it would have been, it probably would have benefited them to have a couple more big shows. There's got to be a happy medium, okay? Back then, you could say there were too few. Now, there's far too many. It's been this way for years. There's got to be a happy medium where, okay, in a given year, we're going to have 5 big events or 6 big events. You don't need 12. I mean, years ago, not even that long ago, I mean, for God's sakes, they had 18 pay-per-views a year, 16 or 18, whatever the number was. 2 pay-per-views in a month, it's too much. Now they've cut down on the number of pay-per-views. Now it's back to 1 a month. But now you got 3 hours of Raw. I mean, talk about overexposure. I mean, to go back to the beginning of your question, if we had 3 hours of Superstars back in the day, fuck yes, all of those guys would have been overexposed. Are you kidding me? Hulk Hogan's run would have been cut in half. I mean, people did start to get tired of him towards the end of his run. It would have happened a hell of a lot sooner. Those guys would have burned out like that. So it was just a different time, you know, in a lot of ways. You know, the top guys like Hogan and Savage and them really did benefit, I think, from there not being as many shows. And the guys that were kind of one level beneath them, like a Jake, like a DiBiase, like a Hennig, you could say that they kind of got the short end of the stick. Robert from Kissimmee, Florida, formerly of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. I like Bay Ridge. It's just impossible to find parking over there. Maybe that's why Robert left. Which do you think was more unexpected and shocking to wrestling fans? Hulk Hogan's 1996 heel turn at Bash at the Beach, or Brock Lesnar breaking The Undertaker's streak at WrestleMania 30? Some people say Bobby the Brain Heenan gave away the Hogan turn with his "whose side is he on" comment, but I thought it was perfectly in line with Heenan's usual anti-Hogan rhetoric. Well, that's funny because I think if you watch, and it might actually be this way on the network, I know it's been this way on some DVD releases. If you watch the footage of Hogan walking to the ring at the Bash at the Beach, they now edit out Bobby Heenan's comments. Again, I don't know if it's like that on the network. I haven't checked. But yeah, he probably should not have said that. They did not like him saying that, even though he was anti-Hogan his whole career. And it made sense. It made sense for somebody like Heenan to make a comment like that. But I think at that moment, they didn't want people having that seed planted. Oh, hey, maybe Hogan's going to turn. They wanted it to be total shock and awe. So yeah, Heenan, that's a classic moment when Heenan made that comment. That's another great question. Honestly, I thought about this. Both were shocking. I'm going to have to say Brock Lesnar, though, ending the Undertaker streak. And here's why. I don't know of very many people, I mean, personally, I don't know of anybody, who honestly believed going into WrestleMania this year that the streak was going to end. There were a lot of people, myself included, who thought and hoped that the streak would never end. They would let him retire with it. But I think even the people who thought, look, this guy is definitely going to lose at some point, didn't honestly think Brock Lesnar would be the guy. Brock Lesnar is an established guy. Brock Lesnar is somebody who, you know, he's there. Let's be honest. I mean, he's there for the paycheck. That's it. He doesn't give a shit about any of this. You think him breaking the streak? I mean, I'm sure, you know, he had to feel somewhat honored or happy that maybe he was picked. I honestly don't think he really gave too much of a shit. I don't think Brock Lesnar is moved by winning championships in pro wrestling anymore, or breaking the streak or any of that stuff. I think he's in it for the paycheck. I mean, I read his book, and he says as much in his book. I mean, he's in it for the business, and that's, I respect the guy for it. At least he's honest. They call him a mercenary on television. In real life, that's kind of what he is. And in a couple of months, he's either going to stay in WWE or he's going to leave, because somebody's going to make him the best offer, and whoever makes him the best offer, that's where he's going to go. And I think he wants to fight. That's why I think it's inevitable he's going back to UFC. So people looked at Brock and said, oh, this guy, he's not even a full-time performer. He wrestles 3 times a year. I mean, surely they won't waste the streak ending on this guy. And then they did. And I was in the crowd that night. Everybody's jaw was on the floor. You looked around. I've never been to an event where a match ended, a quote fake pro wrestling match ended, and seeing that reaction from people. It was genuine shock, the way that I've never seen people shocked over a finish in my life, ever. And if you go back to Bash at the Beach when Hogan turned, there were a lot of shocked people. Oh my God, Hulk Hogan, greatest babyface of all time. Now he's a heel. What's he doing? People tend to forget that I don't know that this was the idea at the time. I don't think it was. I think they were just trying something different. Hogan kind of went through this phase late in 1995 in WCW where, not that he was a heel, but he kind of went to the dark side. That was when he was feuding with the Dungeon of Doom. Hogan would come out, his mustache was shaved off at an angle by like Arn Anderson on TV or Sullivan or somebody. He had no mustache. He came out in all black, like he would in the Hollywood Hogan days. This was long before Hollywood Hogan, though. This was, almost a year earlier than that. And Hogan was on television wearing all black. The red and yellow was ditched. It was almost like Hogan was a bad guy. And again, I don't think the idea was, hey, we're thinking about turning him heel, so let's do a test run. Maybe that was part of the mentality on Hogan's part. He wanted to kind of test the waters. But there had already been indications between that and the fact that people were already getting tired of Hogan. Hogan was getting booed in a lot of cities. Flair was getting cheered. Hogan was getting booed, which is funny because every fucking match those two had almost in WCW, Hogan went over. And Flair knew it. Flair knew his role. His role was to put Hogan over. And Hogan loved working with Flair because he knew that Flair would bump for him, Flair would make him look good, and Flair would lose. There was a fucking match on a WCW pay-per-view once. It was Hulk Hogan against Vader, and somehow Ric Flair lost the match. I think it was a strap match, and somehow, even though he wasn't even in the fucking match, Ric Flair took the loss. He took the fall. So we were already seeing signs that people were souring on Hogan. It really should not have been a big shock to people that this guy might just turn heel. So I think because of those reasons, that was actually less of a shock, I think, to some people than the Undertaker's streak was. It's very close, okay? Both were very surprising, but and the moment, with Hogan turning heel was a far more iconic moment. It meant more, to the history of the wrestling business. Brock Lesnar beating the streak doesn't really mean anything to anybody other than Brock Lesnar. And they took that and they were able to make this guy a monster, and they put the title on him, so hopefully when he loses it, hopefully it will not be to John Cena at the Royal Rumble, even though I have a feeling it will. I'd rather see him drop it to almost anybody but Cena, but I still think a Daniel Bryan-Brock Lesnar match at WrestleMania would be, pretty incredible. But anyway, when he does lose the championship, it's going to be a huge moment because people are just dying to get this title off this guy. He ended the streak. He's been champion now for months. Somebody will stop him, and it will be a big moment. But it's kind of self-contained in a lot of ways. Whereas the Hogan turn, that really in a lot of ways was the catalyst for everything that came after that. The NWO, the Monday Night Wars, which benefited both companies. WCW business went way up. WWE had to compete. Their business, within a couple of years was way up. The Hogan turn at Bash at the Beach is kind of what got everything started. So it meant more, but what was more shocking to me? Undertaker losing at Mania. Cliff wants to know, what made John Cena's white rapper shtick a main event gimmick, but not Zack Ryder's Long Island douchebag gimmick? Well, Zack Ryder's not going to be very happy that you called him a douchebag. I assume that's in reference to me saying on the podcast numerous times that Zack Ryder was not main event material, especially with that gimmick. It's funny, I just got a question from somebody else. I answered them directly. It was about Robbie E. and the bromans in TNA. And I guess Robbie E. made a comment or sent a tweet or something about how 2015 is going to be a big year or a bigger year. And basically this person wanted to know if I could ever see Robbie E. as a world champion. Now, in TNA, anything's possible. Like I said to the guy, I never would have expected that Eric Young or Chris Sabin would be a TNA world champion, but they were. We've never seen Robbie E. as a babyface, so who the hell knows? Maybe he can connect with the crowd in ways that we're not aware. I don't see it, and a lot of it has to do with the gimmick. As long as he's in that gimmick, there's no way he'll even sniff the world title. And Zack Ryder has a very similar gimmick. I mean, he had it first. He's not, with that character championship caliber. Now, if he drops the character and he gets more serious, he becomes a completely different person. I still don't see Zack Ryder as world championship material. Not everybody is meant for the main event. Not everybody is made to be a world champion. There's just some guys who are not. And Zack Ryder is one of those guys, and I stand by that. Now, Ryder deserved better. Absolutely. For as over as he was way more over than he should have been. He deserved better, but not main events. On the John Cena thing, the easy answer is that one was played for comedy, the other was not. John Cena was out there. Now, you could laugh at him. He was, it's kind of funny to look back at him now doing the rapper shtick. Although, in a lot of ways, I kind of pine for those days now compared to this tired, stale fucking character he's got on television now. But, you look at it now, it's kind of a joke, but it wasn't played for comedy. He was out there, he was dead serious. He had the chain around his neck, he would come out there, he would cut very non-PG promos on his opponents. It was not a comedy character. He was the United States champion, so he was not wrestling right away anyway for the WWE title, but he was wrestling for championships, which is more than you can say for Zack Ryder. I mean, he was a U.S. champion, but, for what, 2 months maybe? It was a token title win. Ryder was just comedy through and through. Cena was not. That to me is the biggest difference. But I would also ask this: was John Cena as the White Rapper even really a main eventer? I don't remember him being a main eventer for very long, if at all. He was the U.S. champion. But I would argue that once he beat JBL in 2005 and he won the WWE championship, then he got drafted, I think, 2 or 3 months later over to Raw. It was a big moment. It was on Jericho's highlight reel. People went crazy. Imagine that. Go back and watch the reaction when John Cena was drafted as a surprise pick over to the Raw brand in June of 2005. Holy shit. What happened? The reaction was unbelievable. And people sometimes ask me, when did all this Cena hate start? When did the "Let's go Cena, Cena sucks" chant start? Was it like during the when Cena was wrestling like Rob Van Dam in the Hammerstein Ballroom the year after? It goes back to very shortly after that in 2005. It was SummerSlam. It was SummerSlam in 2005 when he went against Jericho. That was the first time I can really remember the anti-Cena sentiment coming out, and you had the dueling chants. So it goes back to the very beginning, almost, when he won that championship. It was only a few months later that people already were getting sick and tired of the guy. But to go back to the point I was trying to make, when he won that championship and got drafted over to Raw, that's when he started to really, I feel, shed that part of the gimmick. So maybe the answer is that neither was really a main event gimmick. And once Cena got the championship within a few months, he moved away from that. I don't really remember Cena playing up the whole rapper part of his shtick as much, if at all, by the end of 2005, 2006. By then, he was already kind of moving on, and the character was evolving. So I don't think it was ever a main event gimmick at all. Justin from Columbus, Ohio, with a question pertaining to the Attitude Era and how it played out. I was talking with a friend, and he kept saying he missed guys like Steve Austin because, quote, they started it all. I disagreed and said its origin, the origin of the Attitude Era, really started with Bret Hart and his infamous "This is bullshit" promo fueling what would come later on. If the Montreal Screwjob never happened and Bret would have stayed, how would the Attitude Era have been? Would Austin have taken off if Bret was still around? Bret would have been gone with or without Montreal because he had already agreed to a deal with WCW, with Vince McMahon's blessing, by the way, because Vince said he couldn't afford to pay him on his 20-year contract, that they were so happy to announce that 20-year contract on TV in November of 96 when Bret came back. My oh my, what a difference less than a year makes. Couldn't afford to pay him, told him, listen, I give you my blessing, go negotiate with Turner. Bret didn't want to go. I don't blame him. Bret spent his entire career basically in WWE. WCW, I think at that point, still had this, this certain, I don't know. I mean, WCW was already winning, I guess, the war at that point, but maybe Bret could tell that it was kind of a mess of different egos and personalities, and he probably wasn't very fond of Hogan. So, I can understand Bret not wanting to leave. You get very used to being in one place, and Vince, for the most part, I think, treated him well. But Vince said, I can't pay you. And Bret went, and he negotiated, and he got a hell of a deal. I don't cry for Bret Hart. He got himself a nice, cushy, multi-million-dollar deal with WCW. And then all of a sudden, things started to turn around almost right away. They jacked up the prices of the In Your House pay-per-views in the fall of 1997. Which actually ended up not scaring off buyers. What happened was more people. It resulted in more money coming into the company. All of a sudden, Vince McMahon went to Bret and said, hey, listen, I can pay you now. But by then, it was too late. Bret had already made the deal with WCW. I mean, that's how quickly things escalated. From, hey, I can't pay you, I give you my blessing to negotiate. He negotiates, makes a deal. All of a sudden, business within a month or two starts to turn around. Now we can keep you, but the deal was already done. That was the timeline on things. Now, you put that aside, had Bret stayed in WWE, he wouldn't have been happy there. I mean, you watch Wrestling with Shadows, he was already making comments about he didn't like all the tits and ass and the risque stuff and the DX stuff, and he wouldn't even let his kids watch the show anymore. He would go on these rants about how he didn't approve of the direction that the product was going in. He just would not have fit in. He would not have fit in with all the risque stuff they were doing in 98 and 99. I can't picture Bret Hart, this supposedly wholesome character, this wholesome guy, fitting in with what they were doing at the time. I mean, look, he was already complaining about it in 97. I mean, that tells you something right there. And it only got worse from there. I mean, if he thought things were bad in 97, it's a good thing he wasn't in that company in 98. Now, would Austin have gotten as big as he did if Bret Hart had stayed? Absolutely, without a doubt. No question about it. Bret was Austin's biggest fan. He loved Austin. Austin loved Bret. They loved working together. They had a respect for each other. Had they kept the belt on Bret and not taken it off him in 97, I'm sure he would have gladly put Austin over at WrestleMania 14. And, it would have been kind of poetic. I mean, Bret won. Maybe there was a match that Austin did win by pinfall. I think Austin won a pay-per-view match over Bret once by DQ, maybe. But I mean, damn near every single match that Bret Hart and Steve Austin had in 96 and 97, Bret won. It was kind of like Austin and Rock, right? Think back to when Steve Austin and The Rock feuded, this great all-time feud that people remember. Austin won every fucking match. That's why it was such a shock when Austin lost clean to Rock at WrestleMania 19. I mean, that and people didn't know going in that it was going to be Austin's last match. It was shocking because Austin always beat The Rock, and it was kind of the same thing with Bret and Austin in that I don't think they had as many matches as Austin and The Rock did, but practically every single time, right? The two big matches they ever had, Survivor Series and WrestleMania, Bret won them both. I think Austin benefited more from the loss at WrestleMania, but he lost that match, just like he lost at Survivor Series. So I think it would have been poetic for Austin's first championship win at WrestleMania to coincide with his finally being able to beat Bret Hart and pin him in the middle of the ring. Now, where that would have left the pill popper, the showstopper, I mean, that I don't know. I would imagine that Shawn Michaels would not have been too happy keeping the belt on Bret and building to Bret versus Austin at WrestleMania. Michaels back then was a very disruptive force, so I'm sure plans would not have gone off without a hitch. Something would have happened. Something would have had to have given, because I can't imagine Shawn Michaels would have just sat back and been like, all right, yeah, we'll let Bret Hart and Steve Austin have the WrestleMania main event. Something tells me that he would not have been very happy with that. David from Sacramento, California, if you had to think of the top Crimson masks in WWE history and put them together in a list, who would be on your list? Well, I don't like doing lists, but when I think of Crimson masks and I think of just faces soaked in blood, I think of Eddie Guerrero in that first match with JBL at Judgment Day. Not the bull rope match that came the month after, that very first match they had. And there was a lot going against those guys, at that time. Nobody saw JBL as a main eventer. I didn't see JBL as a main eventer. The idea that JBL and Eddie Guerrero were going to main event a pay-per-view was a joke. And to their credit, they went out there and they had a fucking war. And that visual of Eddie Guerrero at the very end, cutting himself, I think he hit an artery. I think he actually did hit an artery and almost passed out from blood loss. I mean, he lost a ton of blood. When he went in the ring and they were brawling, because Eddie was going, he was still up on his feet. He was going after JBL. He did a frog splash. There's blood all over JBL. There's blood all over the mat. Oh, my God. I can't get that image out of my head. So I think of him. I think of Vince McMahon. Holy shit. You talk about blade jobs gone wrong. I think of Vince McMahon blading 2 minutes into his Buried Alive match with The Undertaker at the Survivor Series in 2003. Because Vince knew. I mean, what the hell could Vince do in a match, right? You got to come up with the smoke and mirrors just to get through it. So I guess he thought, well, I'll cut myself in the first 60 seconds. And, look, it added something to the match. It was tough to watch. It was actually uncomfortable for me to watch that match. He was losing so much blood. Blood was leaking out of the guy's head, and the match just started. It's not like it happened at the very end. You knew the match was going to go on for a while, and he's just bleeding out the whole time. So that was disgusting. And then there's Ric Flair. I think Ric Flair is probably the king of the Crimson Mask. One of the best blood jobs I remember in WWE history came from Ric Flair. I just tweeted a link to this like a week ago. In a promo on Raw. The guy got color in a promo. It was during his feud with Triple H. He had a bandage on his head. They must have just had a pay-per-view match. I think Triple H hit him in the head with a sledgehammer. So he had a bandage on his head. And he just got the stitches taken out, he said in the promo. He ripped off the bandage, vintage Ric Flair. He starts going crazy. He's hitting himself in the wound. It opens up instantly. Now there's blood pouring down his face. He's punching the cut. He's smearing the blood all over his face, all over his light-colored shirt. It was amazing. It was amazing to watch. And when he was done, you just look at him, and it's like, this guy looked like he was in a fucking car wreck. All he did was cut a promo. You can go find it on YouTube. It's still up there. It's amazing. I think it was from 2006. This comes from Stewart. What match did Hulk Hogan have where you felt that should have been it for him, and he could have retired after it was over? Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, maybe somebody else. Unlike Mick Foley or Shawn Michaels, Hulk Hogan never had that final match. That's another good question. Hogan, here's what I think. Hogan is of the mindset he wants to wrestle again. I have no interest in seeing Hulk Hogan wrestle again because Hulk Hogan can barely move. Hulk Hogan wrestled a match with Ric Flair about 5 years ago on a tour of Australia. I think it was that final tour that Umaga was on before he passed away. And they had 2 or 3 matches Hogan and Flair did on that tour. It was like the Hulkamania tour. And I think in like the first or second match of the tour, early in the match, Hogan took a bump and his hip went out. He had to wrestle the rest of the match with his hip out, or he had to pop it back in. I mean, he should not be wrestling, okay? And I grew up a Hulk Hogan fan. Probably would not have been a wrestling fan were it not for Hogan. I got sucked into that whole Hulkamania era, and that's when I became fans of everybody else, like Savage and Perfect and Demolition. And I've been a fan ever since. But so I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a Hogan hater, but I don't want to see the guy get hurt. And the match would suck. I mean, you could have a match, I guess, with somebody where you don't do much and it's all about crowd reaction and all that, but the match would be no good. I think the perfect time for Hogan to have had that big final match. Now, you said should he have ended it after the match with Shawn which was in '05. Should he have ended it after the match with Orton? First of all, he should have lost the match with Randy Orton at SummerSlam '06. Okay, that was a joke. He really had no business winning that match. He could have put Orton over. It wouldn't have killed Hogan, but this is Hogan. The match with Shawn was a hell of a lot better than it had any right to be. Of course, Shawn did all that comical overselling in that match. That was actually a hell of a match. Hogan was busted open. He won with the big leg drop. I mean, that wouldn't have been the worst match for Hogan to go out on, but I feel like Hulk Hogan, if he's going to go out, it should have been at a WrestleMania. I mean, there probably would not be a WrestleMania without Hulk Hogan. People talk about, oh, who's Mr. WrestleMania? And you could talk about Undertaker, you could talk about Shawn Michaels. I'd go with Shawn over Undertaker. I mean, Undertaker, yeah, the streak. But to me, it was far more impressive for Shawn to go out there and have, 5-star match after 5-star match after 5-star match with a ton of different guys over the years. But you got to have Hogan in that conversation, and Savage too. Savage had a lot of great matches at WrestleMania. I think Savage doesn't get nearly enough credit for being, Mr. WrestleMania, in that conversation. But Hogan is too. And the iconic images of Hogan coming down to the ring for the big match with Andre, for the big match with Warrior. Hogan's final match should have been at WrestleMania 25. The plan had been, and they've talked about this, the plan had been for Hogan to face John Cena in the main event of WrestleMania 25. So this would have been back in '09, okay, the year before he came, actually less than a year before he made his debut in TNA. The plan had been for Hogan and Cena. Hogan had a back operation, I think, 2 months maybe before WrestleMania. That was botched. I think he actually filed a lawsuit against the clinic or the doctor, whoever, who did the procedure because they mangled his back. They fucked him up somehow badly, and he wasn't able to wrestle that year. So we ended up with a Triple H Randy Orton main event that was no good. And we ended up with the greatest match in WrestleMania history, which probably would have happened anyway. Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. The only saving grace of that entire WrestleMania. That WrestleMania was no good. It sucked. But the main event, imagine a double main event that year of Hulk Hogan versus John Cena and Shawn Michaels against The Undertaker. That would have been a hell of a double main event for WrestleMania. And the Hogan-Cena match would not have been near as good as a match as Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker did, but they didn't have to be. Hogan and Cena, two of the biggest names in the history of that company. Hogan, the face of a bygone era. Cena, the face of the current era. And I'm sure it would have been almost a carbon copy of WrestleMania 18, with most of the people cheering Hogan and booing Cena. But it would have been a huge match. And Hogan could have put over Cena. Cena would have beaten him. That would have been the appropriate finish. Hogan could, raise Cena's arm and pass the torch, as we've seen him done before, even though he never really did end up passing that torch. And it would have been a great, iconic closing moment, I think, to what they were calling the 25th anniversary. Even it wasn't technically the 25th anniversary, but that's what they called it. The silver anniversary of WrestleMania. Big pyro celebration to go off the air. Hogan and Cena, arms raised. That would have been the appropriate send-off, I think, for Hulk Hogan. And unfortunately, it just didn't happen. And here we are now. WrestleMania 31's coming up. Hogan is angling for a match. He's posting tweets on his account that are actually pretty funny. He's like, my wife came to me today and asked me, so what are we doing today? It's a beautiful day outside. And I told her it's buys and tries day, brother. Hogan, he has his moments. He can be funny. And look, he's in great shape. He's still training and God knows what else he's doing to maintain his size, but he's 61 years old. He's in great shape. I'd love to be in that kind of shape when I'm 41, let alone 61. But that ship has sailed. That time has come and gone. I mean, it'd be a big marquee match to put him in there with Cena, I guess, but what can you get out of him at this point? I would be afraid for the guy. The guy has had 9 back surgeries. Now, I don't care if you're a Hulk Hogan fan or not, if you think Hogan has been a detriment to the wrestling business, he's a selfish prick and all this other stuff. I don't care what your opinion is on Hulk Hogan. I don't want to see the guy suffering from back pain. Remember all those drugged up videos of him in the hospital? He would post on his Vine or whatever the hell it was, of him all doped up because he's having back surgery number 6 and back surgery number 7. And hey, brother, they're putting an electrical stimulator in my back now. Hopefully this will be, the cure that I've been looking for. I mean, the guy, I felt bad for him, I mean, that's got to be miserable. back pain and neck pain have got to be the absolute worst. I've had neck pain. I've had back pain before, but not like chronic back pain. You know, I don't want to see this guy crippled up where he can't even walk anymore. He's got nothing left to prove. He has nothing left to prove. But he's not happy that his final match will go down as a match in TNA against Sting. And I agree in that it's kind of shitty that Hulk Hogan's final match was in fucking TNA. It should have been in WWE. But that time has come and gone. I really just don't have any interest in seeing Hulk Hogan back in the ring again. Jermaine from Charleston, South Carolina. I wanted to get your opinion on part-time wrestlers. When you look at Rock, for example, he was gone for so long, only to pop up here and there over the years. He comes back, headlines WrestleMania twice, gets a title run, but does not show up to house shows or work a normal schedule for that period. I'm not saying that he should work house shows, or even that from a business point of view, it's not a good move. The real issue I have is, what does that do to the talent in the back? They do the heavy labor and have to eat the company crap. Guys like Rock and Brock never had to deal with part-timers taking their spot when they were trying to get over, at least that I can remember. Do you think the boys in the back have a legit beef? Why or why not? I will give a somewhat political answer, but I think it's an accurate answer and say yes and no. I try to put myself in their shoes. If I am a guy like Dolph Ziggler or Kofi Kingston, who has been on the roster for 7, 8, 9 years now, long time, those guys have been around for, and they're very talented, and they deserve better. I'm not saying put the fucking world title on them tomorrow, but they deserve better. Start and stop pushes up the yin-yang. Kofi, he was there, man. Kofi was at the cusp back in 2009, and then Randy Orton, whatever happened, and Kofi's never been the same since. Dolph has been through so many start and stop pushes. I would love to be more excited than I am right now for the push he's getting, but, can you blame me? Can you blame me for being, cynical about the whole thing? I hope this is his year. I do have hope that he'll get a run with the belt, however brief it may be. Somehow, by the grace of God, the fans are still behind the guy they have no right to be. They have no right to be behind Dolph Ziggler anymore, and they still are. They're still with him. But if I put myself in their shoes, okay, and they bust their ass, they're trying to get a WrestleMania match, they're trying to work their way up the card, in comes The Rock, he's getting the main event of WrestleMania, they're putting the title on him, he doesn't have to go from town to town the way they do. Yes, I can see why that might bother them. And if I were them, maybe I would actually have a different point of view. Maybe I would be like, God, this is fucking bullshit. This ain't right. 2 years in a row, this guy gets the WrestleMania main event? That's not fair. However, I lean towards the opposite, which is that if you are of the mindset that The Rock coming back is bullshit because he's taking a spot away from somebody else, then I would argue that you don't understand pro wrestling. And I am not a pro wrestler. That is true. There will be idiots who immediately say, you're not a wrestler, so you have no right to talk about it. Urgh. Okay. So there's always going to be idiots that have that point of view. I agree. Hey, I admit, I am not a pro wrestler. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at this and say, somebody of the caliber of The Rock coming back, and I give you 2012. It was either 2011 or 2012, as an example. Because The Rock actually came back in 2011. He didn't wrestle a match that year at Mania, but it was one of those 2 years. Rock came back, okay? He came back, and he had a certain number of Raws that he was committed to. So he was on television, not every week, but he had, a decent number of Raw appearances. But even the weeks that he wasn't there, I remember reading there was a stretch of weeks. I don't even remember how many weeks. It might have been 6 weeks, 8 weeks in the build-up to WrestleMania that WWE had consecutive sellouts for Monday Night Raw. And I think house show business was up. But Monday Night Raw, which had not sold out consistently probably in fucking years at that point, because it's been that long since wrestling's been that hot, all of a sudden, The Rock came back, and even the shows he wasn't necessarily on, Raw was selling out every single week like it was the hottest ticket in town. Gee, I wonder why that was. I'm sure that had everything to do with Dolph Ziggler and Big Johnny and the Great Khali and the Big Show and everybody else on the undercard. I'm sure that they're the ones that were responsible for those sellouts. Of course not. WrestleMania that year, both those years, did big business. Now, today it might not mean as much because I don't know what the fuck is going on today. Everything is about network subscriptions. They've killed their pay-per-view business. The whole game has changed now. And that might be why it's not worth to keep Brock Lesnar around. I'd love to see Brock stay. It might not make sense for them to keep Brock Lesnar around because what are they really getting out of him? What's the value that they're getting out of him in terms of the pay-per-views now, okay? They've killed their pay-per-view business. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, their pay-per-view business was still thriving. It was still there. It was still one of their main sources of revenue. And bringing in a guy like The Rock meant big business. Bringing Brock Lesnar back. Why did they bring Brock Lesnar back after all the animosity, after all the bad blood, after the lawsuits and everything that was said? Why would they bring Brock Lesnar back? Why do you think they would bring Brock Lesnar back? I don't know. You know, Brock Lesnar was only maybe the biggest pay-per-view draw in UFC history. I don't know. Maybe that had something to do with it. Now, he didn't bring all of those people over with him. The hope was that he would bring some of those people over with him. I think the biggest pay-per-view UFC ever did, which was headlined by a Brock Lesnar fight, did, I want to say 1.6 maybe, 1.5, 1.6 million pay-per-view buys. If WWE got a quarter of that, they would have been happy. They didn't quite get that many. Although that first pay-per-view that Brock came back, that Extreme Rules match with John Cena, actually did pretty good as far as Extreme Rules is concerned. But I mean, pro wrestling and MMA are two completely different things. You're not going to be able to pop a pay-per-view buy rate that big. It's just not going to happen. But they brought Brock in because he was a draw. He was one of the most popular, one of the hottest athletes in any sport at that point, and one of the most successful. And he made millions in UFC, and the hope was that he'll come back to WWE, this legit tough guy fighter, and he'll bring some of that business with him. And again, you could argue whether or not it was worth it. Was it a success? Was he a success? Was it his fault? Was it the booking of Brock Lesnar? I would say that probably had a lot to do with it. You bring the guy in, he loses his first fucking match. That sounds pretty fucking stupid to me. So they didn't do him any favors, and then he beat Triple H, then he lost to Triple H, and then he had another match with Triple H. Not the way I would have handled Brock Lesnar if I had any control over what to do with the guy when you brought him back. I think a lot of people would have done things very differently with Brock when he came back. The point is, Brock does not work house shows. Brock has a very unique schedule, even more than The Rock. I think The Rock did way more work than Brock does. There was a reason why they brought these guys back, because they're big stars. And the fact that Dolph Ziggler and Kofi Kingston and Big E are not big stars is not their fault necessarily. That's more an indictment on WWE. The fact that they don't have as many big stars as they used to. Stars like Brock, stars like The Rock, stars like Steve Austin and Chris Jericho. You'll get a guy like a CM Punk or even a Daniel Bryan who gets over, almost by accident. But they are, I don't want to say they're incapable, because that's not true. They're very capable of giving guys a chance to become the next big star. It hasn't happened. Now, is that because everybody out there sucks and is not as good as Steve Austin and The Rock? I can't believe that's true. I mean, I have to think that there's somebody out there, possibly that they have under contract right now, or in developmental, or somewhere, who could be the next Steve Austin, who could be the next Rock. Are they going to get that shot? That I don't know. Because now things are very different. Everything is scripted. Everything is regimented. Everything is corporate. It's not fun. It's not as free. These guys don't have the freedom that those guys had 10, 12, 15 years ago. That's an indictment on WWE. So the fact they have to go out and bring these guys in, blame them. Don't blame The Rock. Don't blame Brock Lesnar. I would have done the same fucking thing. And for everybody on the roster 2 years ago who was bitching that, The Rock is taking a spot away from me at WrestleMania, do you fucking think that those guys would have been in the main event? They were on the card. Rock not being on the show would not have made a lick of difference in the spot that a fucking Dolph Ziggler had on the WrestleMania card in 2012. Not one difference. The difference it did make is that Rock meant big business for WrestleMania. WrestleMania did over 1 million buys that year. And in theory, that trickles down. Maybe not as much as it should, But when you have somebody who's a draw, I mean, look at Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan back in the day, I mean, Brian Blair, I remember him doing an interview. Iron Sheik's favorite guy, Brian Blair, who was one of the killer bees. Okay, he was an undercard guy. This was back in like 86, 87 in the WWF. And they asked him, like, you know, what did you think? What did guys really think of like Hogan back then and him getting all the glory and being the big star and being on top for as long as he was? And he said, we loved it. You were hoping that you ended up on the Hogan house shows, because they would do these split crew house shows. They would have 2, sometimes 3 different teams in 3 different cities in one night. I mean, you'd think the travel is brutal now. I mean, my God, it's no wonder these guys were all fucking coked up back in the day just to do the schedule. But, you know, Blair was saying, listen, you know, when you saw that your name was on the lineup on a Hulk Hogan house show, you were happy because you knew that building was going to be sold out and you were getting a nice big paycheck for that show. So it's the same mentality, and I think the people that bitched and moaned about it, they don't fucking get it. They don't get it. So that's my opinion on part-time wrestlers. You know, it shouldn't be that way. They should not have to bring in these guys. There's a reason why you said, I don't remember when The Rock was coming up or when Brock Lesnar was coming up, that fucking Bruno Sammartino was taking up a spot on the roster. No, you know why? Wrestling was different back then. Back then, they had these things called stars. They actually had the ability to create new stars, which they seem to have forgotten. They have amnesia. They don't know how to do it anymore. There was no reason to bring back guys like that. They brought back Bob Backlund in 1992. Did they bring back Bob Backlund right away to be in the main events? Of course not. They brought Bob back. I mean, God knows why they brought Bob Backlund back. And I love Bob. But before he became Crazy Bob, he was fucking boring. They brought him back. He had no theme music. He came down to the ring. He looked weird. He moved around weird. He's a weird dude. They didn't bring him in and put him in main events. Bob Backlund, he didn't have a main event on a pay-per-view until 94. And that was just to get the belt off Brett and put it on Diesel 2 days later. So yeah, there's a reason why they didn't have to bring back guys like that to take up a big spot on the roster. They didn't have to. Back then, they knew what the fuck they were doing. Now, more often than not, I get the impression they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Nate, from Charlotte, North Carolina, Flair country. If there's one thing I've noticed from many wrestling companies, it's that most wrestling commentators in the States are unbearable to listen to. Amen to that. In WWE, especially on Raw and SmackDown, Michael Cole, JBL, and Jerry Lawler, while they can sometimes call a great match, oftentimes are horrific as a trio. When I watch a match involving the Divas, they sell it like they don't even give a shit, and I could say the same for the low to mid-card matches. TNA's commentary and even Lucha Underground's commentary have also failed to impress me. Is there a commentary team that you find bearable in today's wrestling? Well, there's a difference between good and bearable. I find Matt Striker and Vampiro bearable. I don't think they're a great combination. I've kind of gotten over them in recent weeks. I think Striker is much better than Vampiro. Vampiro just doesn't do anything for me. They're bearable. TNA, they're starting their new announced team this week on Destination America, Josh Matthews and Taz, so let's give them a shot. Maybe they'll turn out to be a revelation. Who knows? Maybe they'll work very well together. I think it'll be a lot of Taz busting the guy's chops and probably cracking jokes on each other back and forth, but as long as it doesn't take away from the action in the ring, I'm okay with that. You know, Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan used to riff on each other all the time. I just talked about this week on Sound Off 362. Heenan and Monsoon a lot of times would crack jokes and talk about things that had nothing to do with the match, but they didn't do it in a way that took away from the match. And that's the biggest problem I have with the announcers now, or at least how they're being coached. They deserve some of the blame, but not all of it, because they're only doing what they're told. That's why I think no matter who you put in there, it's depressing, because you could take the best announcer in the world and put them in there, and it's not going to make a lick of difference because they're still being coached by Vince McMahon. Now, on the podcast this week, I did put forth the idea of Joey Styles, who I'm sure is very happy doing what he's doing now and doesn't want to do full-time announcing anymore. And I was never the biggest Joey Styles fan, so maybe standards have fallen and I'm this desperate. But I just heard Joey Styles do commentary on a fucking action figure match on WWE's YouTube channel with Bret Hart and Daniel Bryan, and he blew me away. I think he blew me away. He's good. Not that he was so great, but more just it reminded me of what wrestling commentary used to be. and how it could still be, I'd be okay with a Joey Styles Big Show combination on Raw. Why not? Why not give him a shot? Big Show was great when he did commentary on Raw last week. Do Joey Styles and the Big Show. Give him a couple week run, test run as the announce team on Raw, or test him out on SmackDown. Albert, A-Train, he's another one. He's been doing announcing on NXT, a little rough around the edges, but I think he's got a lot of potential. I like the guy a lot. Put fucking Joey Styles and Albert together. Anything would be better than what we're getting now. They are the most unbearable announce team I have ever had the misfortune of listening to. Whether it's their fault or not, they are. That's just how it is. I defy you. I defy you to find me an announce team that has consistently been as bad as they have been. There have been some awful announcers. Don't get me wrong. There was a guy that used to do announcing on some WWF house shows in the 80s called Duke Doherty. I think he was a job guy out of Boston. For whatever reason, they decided this guy's got a voice for announcing. He didn't. Oh my God. I can't even begin to describe how horrific and how horrendous it was to listen to this guy. There have been worse announcers, but I'm talking week to week, month to month. Having an announce team this bad that actually takes away from the product, it's as bad as it's ever been. So I would say Stryker and Vampiro on Lucha Underground, even Kevin Kelly and is it Steve Corino? I know they did the Final Battle show. I don't have access to Ring of Honor TV, so I assume they're the announce team week to week. I'm sure they're bearable enough, but I can't honestly say that right now in the U.S. we have any truly good or truly great announce teams in wrestling, and that's a shame. The fact that I have to struggle to sit here and think of the closest thing to a really good, fun, informative wrestling announce team, I can't think of one. Dominic from Baltimore. I know much can be said about his career as a writer, but do you think there is still value in Vince Russo as an on-screen character for a pro wrestling company? I honestly enjoyed his work as an authority figure in WCW. God knows we don't need any more authority figures in wrestling, but I cannot help but feel with the heat he has with wrestling fans, he could be a solid mouthpiece for an up-and-coming heel as long as the book is kept away from him. I have no interest. I have less than zero interest in seeing Vince Russo back on my television screen. None. Zero. Zilch. I didn't enjoy his work in WCW. I'm glad that you enjoyed him as an authority figure. I didn't. I thought he was just trying to be a poor man's Vince McMahon, poor man's Eric Bischoff, and it completely turned me off from the product. His accent drives me nuts, and that's coming from a fellow New Yorker here. So the idea of him as a mouthpiece of all things for somebody else is like nails on a chalkboard to me. I know where you're coming from, but you got to understand something, okay? When you say you can't help but feel he has heat with wrestling fans and you should exploit that, you should take advantage of that, you're talking about a very small group of people. People that are left, anyway. I don't even know. I mean, a lot of those people that would recognize Russo on television, they don't even watch wrestling anymore. I'm sure that almost everybody who watched those dying days of WCW, they're all gone anyway. All of them. Every single one of them. The other part of it is, okay, if the guy was such a great heel, or even such a great talker, or was so hateable that he could draw money as a manager, then it might make sense. Even though I wouldn't like it, I might say, you know what? For business, it might make sense. I don't even know if that's possible anymore. I don't know if it's possible for a manager in modern day pro wrestling the way it's done to draw money or sell tickets, because it's not really about the individual anymore. I mean, John Cena still means big business on the house shows, so maybe we could put Cena in that category. But otherwise, it's all about the brand, right? It's all about the brand name. It's all about the WWE initials or the TNA. Well, not TNA, but anyway, it's an old school way of thinking that I don't think really exists anymore. Not in WWE or TNA, that's for sure. Maybe in other parts of the world it does, like Mexico and Japan. Bringing Russo in will not draw them another dime. And it's not going to do anything to help anybody on that roster. I mean, I can just picture, Vince Russo on television in a backstage segment telling Cesaro, you got to go out there and shoot on them, bro. You know, you got to shoot. You got to talk about the writers. They're not scripting anything for you and how they're not giving you the push, bro. Bro, bro. No, bro. Seriously, bro. Bro. Come on, bro. See, I want to blow my brains out already, and I'm the one saying this shit. Imagine it coming out of his mouth. All right, we'll do two more here. Jacob from Sydney, Australia. How do you feel about the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view being discontinued and replaced with Fastlane? Do you think this marks the burial place of the Chamber itself? Or could we see a return in the future like they did before 2010 with SummerSlam, New Year's Revolution, etc.? Well, it's not the death of the Chamber. I think they just moved it, right? I think the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view is now taking place in June, I believe. So they just moved it, which I agree with, by the way. I don't think there should be any event between Royal Rumble and WrestleMania. I think you could leave that open. You want to have like a live network special, kind of like in the vein of the old Saturday Night Main Event type shows, maybe for like 90 minutes. I think that'd be fine. I don't see the need for Fastlane. I don't see the need to put the Chamber between Rumble and Mania. So I'd be fine with them getting rid of the whole pay-per-view and just saving the Chamber match for a special show every now and then when you need to dust it off. But I think they just kind of moved it. I think it's in June. And last question here. This comes from Alan. Alan in North Hollywood, California. Do you remember the wrestling sitcom Learning the Ropes? It had a short run in syndication in the late 80s with former football player Lyle Alzado as a teacher who moonlights as a wrestler, and they frequently had actual pro wrestlers guest star from the NWA like the Road Warriors and Tully Blanchard. If you did see it, what were your thoughts on it at the time? I did not see the show when it first aired on television. I saw it on YouTube a few years ago for the first time. It was cheesy as all hell, but I enjoyed it. It was weird seeing the Road Warriors out of character like that. It's a shame what happened to Lyle Alzado. I think he died only a few years after that. So, I mean, I like what I saw. Like I said, it was way over the top, cheesy as all hell, but that was most television shows, back in the 80s. It was kind of par for the course, I think, with shows back then. You can see for yourself. There's still, I don't know if the full episodes are up on YouTube anymore, but I know some clips are, including clips with the Road Warriors. Like I said, it's just very weird. They were playing these big, like, meathead buffoons on the show, like you would expect them to. That was kind of the stereotype of wrestlers at that time. And that was, I mean, a lot of wrestlers were kind of like that. They'd come out, they'd look big and mean, they'd grunt, they had face paint on, or stuff like that. But there were scenes in the episode that I saw where they didn't even have their face paint on. They were at a party, like eating food or something. I don't know, something like it. It was very weird. Like you would expect to see something like that now, but not back then when they were at their peak of popularity in the NWA. You know what else is cheesy, but I'm pissed it never got picked up by ABC? I think it was ABC. It could have been NBC. I think it was ABC. Roddy Piper and Jesse Ventura filmed a pilot called Tag Team. That was about two pro wrestlers who were banished from the business and they're forced to get jobs as police officers. I mean, I think they were forced to get jobs and they were like looking for jobs and they ended up somehow like going to the academy and training and then becoming police officers. That was the whole premise of the show. Although the pilot was a movie. It was filmed as like an hour-long movie. Shannon Tweed was actually in the pilot too. I feel like Shannon Tweed was in every single Skinamax movie I ever flipped on when I was in high school. This was back though in the early 90s when they filmed this. It was an hour-long movie. And the hope was that it would get picked up as a TV series. And it's on YouTube right now. The entire movie, the hour-long pilot that Piper and Ventura filmed is on YouTube right now. Go find it and watch it. You must watch this thing. It's awesome. Better than most episodes of Monday Night Raw, I would wager. I think everything was a go. I think they thought that this thing was actually going to become a TV show, and every indication that they had gotten from the network executives was that it was well received and they were going to move forward with it. And like the day before they were supposed to start shooting the show, the network axed it for some reason. I'm pretty sure Piper's told the story on his podcast in the last few months. The thing had promise. I think it could have gone up against any other cheesy 80s cop show back then, and I think Tag Team would have been just fine. This might have been a little cheesier than most, but I think it had promise. I'm a sucker for old 80s shows like that anyway. Hunter, is one of my favorite shows. Fred Dryer was a fucking boss on that show. That's another one for you guys to check out. And we'll end with that. Keep emailing me your questions, thesolomonster@gmail.com. I have been severely backlogged, so I'm in the process of trying to go through questions that people first sent me in October and November. I am determined to get to most all of them at some point. So keep sending in your questions. You never know when I may use them on the regular podcast. I may just answer you directly, or I may use yours in a future installment of the Inbox here on YouTube. So keep emailing me. You can listen to the full episodes of the Solomonster Sounds Off each and every Sunday. They drop on the Solomonster.com. You can stream them. You can download them directly. You could also subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher Radio as well, where we are routinely in the top 10 charts in the sports category. So please find us on there. You can follow me on Twitter. @Solomonster is the place to go. I usually live tweet during Raw every Monday night during the big pay-per-views. So you can find me on there @Solomonster. And again, please hit the subscribe button that you see in this video, that you see below this video. That way when new inboxes and new extras and reviews and other fun stuff goes up on YouTube, you will be the first to know about it. And if you have a moment, why not check out our store? Buy a shirt. ProWrestlingTees.com/Solomonster Sounds Off. We've got 11 different designs up in the store right now. I'm sure you'll find one that you like. So check it out, and until next time, we will be back with a brand new extra very soon. Be well, stay safe, and for the rest of you guys, I will see you this weekend for a brand new episode of the Solomonster Sounds Off. Until then, take care, guys.